Everybody. We are going to get started here in just a minute. We'll see if other people can get on and get started. Right now, with me, we've got the Cinema Air, Andrew Rothschild, Karen Litzy, and Gene Shirakabrad, who I see is just getting started. Today, we're going to be doing a little bit on cardiometabolic disease and the prevention of, and we'll get kind of a nice little discussion going. The slides I have up, I'll share as we roll, but I put them up as a backup on my blog, which is mikeeisenhart.com, and you can find that information there, as well as some of the links to various studies and things where I kind of pulled the information. This is our second live discussion and kind of how nutrition relates to physical therapy and how physical therapy should include nutrition in our interventions. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We are recording live, so we'll go back and forth with that, and we'll see if we can get some folks on board. So,
perfect.
Yeah, let me welcome Cinema. Go ahead. I'm just going to invite you guys, and I will open up the mics and have some conversation. Welcome back.
Hey, so it's good to be back. It's always nice to hang out with some people smarter than me. Yeah, last conversation is actually really good. It was cool to see how people kind of approach this this general idea of introducing nutrition into our clinical work. And I think the topic we're going to go into today is going to be important because I just heard a podcast, I think it was today or yesterday, that said that roughly figures are roughly between 30 and 60% of people have some sort of a metabolic syndrome today in the U.S. That's pretty wide range, but even at the low end, 30%, one out of every 3 people you'll be seeing in the clinic will most likely be having one of the markers of the metabolic syndrome that we'll be going into today. So it's I'm excited to see what everybody has to share and where the conversation will go.
All right. I'm trying to invite one other guest here. There we go. See if that did it. So let's before we get started on the slide, I'm going to welcome Andrew Rothschild. Andrew, welcome back.
Oh, thank you. It's good to be back. Definitely had a great time talking last time about nutrition, and definitely another sort of thing we can bring to the table as physical therapy providers, especially hopefully as our role starts to increase, sort of in the direct access and becoming more of a primary care provider from a musculoskeletal standpoint. But adding in nutrition as part of some of the interventions we can apply can really make a difference in a lot of patients.
All right. So welcome and thanks for being here. I'm going to welcome quickly Karen Litzy. Welcome.
Hi, how are you? Sorry, I'm like losing my voice. I have a really sore throat right now. But thanks for doing this again. I look forward to seeing what everyone else has to offer today. Sorry, I have no voice left.
All right. Well, we'll only ask a few questions of you. That's absolutely. All right. And last we have Gene Shirakabrad. I don't know if Gene, I think I've got you.
Over here. Can you hear me?
Good. Okay. Yeah, I got you. Welcome.
Thanks, man. Happy to be here, recovering from my post-Thanksgiving metabolic recovery here.
Nice. And just joining us, it looks like we've got Urson.
Santa Claus.
Yeah. Looking good.
I'm here.
Welcome.
Thank you. Is that Mike?
That is, yeah. So this is Mike, and we've got Cinema, Andrew Rothschild, Karen Litzy, who we're only going to ask very rare questions of because she's losing her voice, Gene Shirakabrad, and you. And I'm thinking Monique and Andrew, or excuse me, and Adam from Marathon PT. I sent invites. Hopefully you guys got those. I know you were two who had said you'd want to be on. And I'll try to roll back and forth if we can get those going. But I sent those through your Google Hangouts, through your circles, or the email you provided. So take a look in your email if you don't see those.
Of course, Cinema is just a random Murray square.
I know I can't figure out how to put like this my profile, my Google profile on there, like the pic.
Yeah, but that's also, I'm sure, just some, you know,
It's a blue blob.
yeah, fully anonymous anthropomorphic character.
uh,
Well, I'll just turn off my camera then, since I'm the only one on camera.
Yeah, so before we were on air, that was you're certainly welcome to have it on. Plus, if you got a cool Santa hat and some Beats or whatever you're wearing there, that's awesome. But yeah, I'm trying to shift to too many things, so it just kind of looks silly. All right, so it being 5 after here, or 7 after, I'm going to get rolling through the slides. This is something I put together really just for tonight's discussion, and with any luck, this will be how we kind of frame the discussions going forward. I'm hoping we can kind of pick a topic. Somebody can get on and kind of roll through some information. Make it a little bit educational for anybody who's involved, viewing either live or goes back and watches the video, and then maybe some rich discussion as we go. So what I'll do is I'm going to mute your mics, and then I'll roll through that. Cinema, I'm going to leave you as my co-host. I will try to leave you on there. There you go, so you can interject, especially since you have a slide. And then we'll go back and have some discussion. All right. So let me see if I can do this little screen share the right way, and then we will be ready to roll. Okay. So yeah. So hopefully everyone sees my slides. Cinema, you got them?
I see this. It looks like a screen share, but it's like it doesn't see the slides.
All right. Let me try that again. Whoa. How about now?
It looks like a scene out of the Matrix.
Oh no. That's not good. Let's try this.
Mike, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
There you go. Okay.
Got him? Okay, I hit the wrong screen share. Okay.
Perfect.
Thanks. And Monique, I don't know if you're able to listen in or not. Let's see, we got a couple of people who look like are trying to get on. Please resend the invitation. Sorry, I'm doing by tweets here. Let me see if I can just quickly do those. I'm going to stop sharing for just 1 second, see if we can get these last 2 folks on, and then we'll go from there. All right, so if everyone can bear with me for a sec.
Hey, Erson, since we're kind of on a little bit of pause, last webcast or hangout, we kind of asked everybody a question of were you bringing up nutrition to your patients, and if so, kind of like how did you start that conversation? How often do you kind of bring up the idea of how someone fuels themselves and how someone their nutritional profile and what they could change and stuff like that?
Pretty rarely. Basically, I think I try not to overcomplicate things, and I probably explain way more than my patients want to hear anyway. They would probably have to be someone who was not responding. And I just had someone do that, and I basically put her on an elimination diet because I'm just dabbling in this for now, and I didn't really know enough about structuring anything for her. And I think myself and a couple other PTs basically agreed that whatever was going on with her, being like a 22-year-old, very young, healthy DPT student, she should not have any of the symptoms she was having after seeing several people. So, it's basically to my chronic pain patients, my centrally sensitized patients, and of those, most of my patients are not that, just because it's a smaller percentage of the population.
Sure. All right.
Monique, looks like we got you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
All right. So I think I'm going to go ahead and get these going again. Let's see if we can get that. And you guys tell me if I got it wrong again. Slides up?
Yep.
All right. So let's roll through this, and hopefully we can cut through this quickly. But yeah, so the slides are really to talk a little bit about, kind of set the stage for the discussion, and just to give a little bit about about sort of my practice and kind of how we've gone about it. I started with a little bit of about me page here. So again, my name is Mike Eisenhart. I am a consulting physical therapist. That's how I kind of describe myself. I'm gonna actually, let me see, do I have everybody on mute here? I'm just gonna mute you. All right, there we go. And I'm the managing partner of Proactivity Associates. Our website's there. I'm currently the president of the APTA New Jersey chapter. My mission is to be a doer of extraordinary things. That's kind of how I try to live my life, and I'm an occasional blogger on my website there. So this is kind of where we start the discussion and start the conversation, and that is the fact that heart disease and kind of heart-related diseases account for 700,000 deaths per year in the U.S. So, a few years ago when I started looking at kind of PT's role in this, most of the time we were really kind of an after-the-fact, referral, many times cardiac rehab possibly, and maybe even less and less of that. And I tend to work in the corporate space, working with the large employers and also in our community, and really started looking at prevention and the idea of it a long time ago. So very early on, we went from sort of pain-related prevention and kind of, hey, my knees hurt, to, well, I can help you with your knees, but if we don't take 40 or 50 pounds off your frame, it's going to be very difficult to keep those knees healthy. And kind of, that quickly took us into heart-related disease, which quickly became cardiometabolic disease. And so, in a sense, metabolic syndrome, or syndrome X as it's sometimes called, or cardiometabolic disease, is a cluster of different risk factors that come together and predispose a person to specifically heart disease, diabetes, and many of the related. But it doesn't just end there. So this kind of gives you a breakdown. These are the top 10 leading causes of death in the U.S. I believe they were 2012 data. And of course, what you can see there is that heart disease is number one. With over 600,000 deaths per year, it is number one, has been number one for a very, very long time. And although cancer is now rivaling it, which I guess is a good thing if you're a heart disease researcher and medical professional, because that, of course, that number's been tracking downward. Unfortunately, cancer seems to be tracking upward. But if you look on that list, one of the things that I think is hidden in this list is how many different things can be really attributed, whether directly or indirectly, to these cardiometabolic cluster, this sort of risk factor cluster. You can certainly make the case that some forms of cancer have been linked here. I mean, prostate cancer has been very closely linked here. Breast cancer has been linked here. Colon cancer. Certainly stroke. I mean, it's just another vascular disorder. Alzheimer's has been implicated. Diabetes, of course, is there, as are a whole bunch of other potentials, and even nephritis, you could certainly say, because we know of all the factors associated with small vessel disease. So these things kind of play in, and we say, well, it's a large chunk, but when you think of the total number of deaths in the U.S., the top 10 leading causes, and a quarter of them or thereabouts being heart disease, it's a pretty big deal, a big number, and it's one that as physical therapists, we don't often attack directly, but we are definitely involved in. And although if I had it my way, I might say we should attack it directly, we should be attacking it whether directly or indirectly. So this slide really just gives you a little bit of a breakdown here, and the thing that you want to notice is that on the left hand of the screen, what you can see there is that there's this huge jump between somewhere around the third decade of life, right? So the top left here, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but if you can, 100 ages 1 to 9, heart disease is a pretty small percentage, 3.4%, which is of course a good thing. Ages 10 to 24, it grows a little, but not by much. Actually, in this graph it shrinks, but in general, if you look at the numbers, it grows a little, but stays around the same. It's getting worse over time, unfortunately. But then you see once we get to this 25-year-old range, it makes this big jump in here to 12% of the deaths. And so we see a 4 multiple growth in that sort of decade, in that third decade. And then it just keeps growing, from 12 to 20 to 25 to 29, and it becomes the largest killer in America. What's interesting is that if you look at the same data, and this is taken from the CDC's slide deck and some of their data, you can see that it doesn't vary that much, across major ethnicities. Although we know that it is a factor, and we know that certain disparities exist. You see here, 20%, 22%, and then another 23%. So a couple percentage points, but not a major difference. So what is the risk cluster, right? So cardiometabolic disease, or this kind of syndrome X, or sometimes metabolic syndrome as it's sometimes called, is this risk cluster of basically 5 things. And the definition that I'm using here, although there is some disagreement on the definition, Internal Diabetes Federation is the one that I'm using, and that is centralized obesity, right? So people carry their weight around the middle, and that's generally measurement oriented, 40 inches for men, 35 inches or greater for women, measured right around the midsection, and then any 2 of the other following results. So fasting triglycerides greater than 150, and as kind of an asterisk there are plenty of studies that are now showing non-fasting triglycerides being an important value. Typically that comes in around 165. Fasting HDL less than 40 for men and less than 50 for women. Elevated blood pressure, either 135 millimeters of mercury for systolic or greater than or equal to 85 for diastolic. So, or a diagnosis of hypertension. And then fasting glucose greater than 100 milligrams per deciliter. So when you look at this and you start saying to yourself, okay, so, you know, and based on maybe what in the beginning of the intro, Cinema had mentioned about the percentage of people who are going to be struggling with this at some level. I mean, we're talking about almost everybody is going to walk in the door with some form of central obesity. Hopefully they don't qualify into this metabolic risk cluster of over 40 inches or over 35 inches, but it's a, you know, sort of a central tenet across the U.S. especially, but across the world now, where, you know, large bellies are becoming kind of the norm. And then you start looking at these other numbers. Now, as a physical therapist, we certainly have, most of us are checking blood pressure on a regular basis, should be probably checking it in every session and multiple times. But overall, it's an easy access point, so that's an easy one. And what I would argue is that triglycerides, HDL, and glucose are actually easier to get our hands on than we may think. And so that's one of the things that I'm often trying to push PTs into thinking about and figuring out ways to get that access to that information, whether it be testing in their own office, which is not out of the realm of possibility for a PT, you know, through different relationships, or, you know, or getting it from, you know, lab work. But what do we want to know about it? Ultimately, what we want to see here is that the number of risks as they go up, the death rate skyrockets. And so you can see at syndrome X here, metabolic syndrome, you know, almost 3 times the hazard ratio when you get 3 of those risk factors. So you get that central obesity plus 2, any of those other 2, you're hitting, you know, almost, you know, 2.71, you know, times hazard ratio here. That gets to the point where it becomes meaningful. I mean, we're talking about 3 times the risk. If you add metabolic syndrome in with some sort of you know, diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, it goes up even more. Add it in with cardiovascular disease, or even both, and you're talking about almost 8 times the risk of you know, cardiovascular mortality. So this is a huge step up, and if we look at that curve, I mean, that's beyond linear, right? I mean, it goes through the roof as risks are added. So it's something that we've got to kind of look at and start saying, well, you know, as a provider that is touching people on the ground, you know, kind of connecting with people on the ground, we have a good opportunity to be right in the thick of this, maybe even more so than the average person's doc. This slide, I like this one a lot, and of course you can, again, as I said, all of these links are and I'll put, if they're not on there, I'll put them on, but on my blog, I try to put all the links on the page this time. This is a concept, what they're calling excess heart age, with and without diabetes. So on the left hand of the screen, it's folks without diabetes. On the right-hand side of the screen, folks with diabetes, and essentially you look at, you know, kind of women versus men, what the age range is here. So if I pick myself and I say I'm closest to a 40-year-old male who isn't diabetic and is not a smoker, I would be looking at kind of this cluster here. And just as a brief pause, can everyone see my cursor? When I do that, do you see it?
Yep, we can see it.
Awesome. Okay, thanks. So at 40 years old, so I would be in this risk cluster here, and then from there you would go back and say, okay, so looking at that, you know, we can come in here and take a look at overall, I believe it's my glucose. Let's see here, and you, oh, I'm sorry, my BMI. And so my BMI would be closest to 25, so I would line it up, and it would basically have a 0 effect. So for me, for my own personal level of risk, I would be this little block here, and you may or may not be able to see that well, but those charts are in there. This is the same basic idea on the diabetic side, but I like that because I think it's a very, it's kind of a catchy soundbite that we could easily use with, you know, with a client or a customer or consumer. You know, someone who says, well, your heart age is, you know, it's your chronological age plus whatever this chart says. And there's a nice brief that the CDC put out on that. So I like that. I mean, it's kind of a catchy thing. makes people think a little bit, and is your heart older than your actual chronological age? So interestingly, when we look at metabolic syndrome, thankfully, I guess, it does seem to have gone down a little bit. And this is a Journal of the American College of Cardiology study that looked at prevalence and trends of this syndrome X, as they sometimes call it. And the good news is that over the over time it seems to have gone down. But the bad news is that it went down only a very little bit. And if we're going to get anywhere, we need to attack this in a much more aggressive way. And so as PTs, we really need to start thinking of this as the oncoming tidal wave, because in a sense, these are folks who cannot heal well. They're just not going to heal as well as they should or as fast as they should. And when we're being pressured from all angles to get people better faster and at less cost, so get higher quality, lower cost, this adds a real risk into our ability to do that if a person is going to heal slower than they otherwise should. What this particular prevalence study said was that triglycerides and blood pressure seem to improve, but they linked that to medication usage. And so I, of course, that's a good thing. We certainly want people to have high levels of adherence with their meds. But I sort of look at it and say, well, I wonder if that's really fixing the problem or just kind of prolonging it. On the flip side, glucose and waist circumference seem to worsen. So ultimately, it says people are gaining more belly fat, and of course, there's lots of different folks who have decent studies to show that those two things do often go hand in hand, especially with high concentration of carbohydrate. So this study I think is an excellent one because it does sort of address whether or not meds alone are going to get the job done, and I really like this idea because what it's showing here is this white line is kind of the placebo line, and then you have the folks on statins, and ultimately what they found was that 20% of the people who are on statins still had a major cardiovascular event within 5 years. So this is kind of one of those moments that the public, hopefully, we can be educating the public that, look, statins are not a suit of armor. And some people, and I know there are some folks who have even testified in front of Congress to say exactly that. To say, look, this is not something that we're not necessarily fixing the problem. We're not necessarily seeing a reduction in cardiovascular events, even though we're seeing a reduction in cholesterol. And so, of course, cholesterol has come under fire lately, and all the new guidelines and everything that's happened in the last couple of years. And of course, if you haven't followed that and you want some details, hit me anytime. So, what's the real question? Some of it is the body able to process fat? Are we able to use fat as fuel, and are we doing it efficiently? And of course, sugar is fuel as well. So the human body has basically two types of fuel we can use: sugar and fat. One of the interesting findings here was that postprandial episodes of cholesterol and free fatty acids, so triglycerides, have been seen in metabolic syndrome. So it's a really important thing. What it basically tells us is that although people may be draining, throughout the night when they're kind of running out of their sugar and using up fat as fuel, as soon as they eat, the bucket not only fills but overflows, and we're seeing this in the bloodstream, which of course causes inflammation and a host of disorders. As an aside, I read a really awesome article last night. It was kind of a review of inflammation overall and the dietary components of it in the New Yorker. So certainly we can find that and tweet it out. On the right here, you see the probability of having this metabolic syndrome, tied directly to activity level. So typically studies are looking at leisure time activity, so non-work related. And of course, again, you see this steep drop-off as leisure time activity increases, gets out here into the high, risk of metabolic probability of metabolic syndrome goes down. So of course, as PTs, that should speak to us because it says, well, yeah, we should be promoting activity all the time. And although many of us are, unfortunately, many of us may not be. And there's this potential for us to want to look at the patient as one diagnosis that walks in the door. And if we really are doing a service, we should be looking at the whole patient and saying, hey, this is a risk factor. And so on every clinical exam, we should likely be taking more than just weight. We should probably be taking waist circumference at the minimum, and probably blood pressure as well, and kind of looking at those. Although I'm not going to read this slide because I really want to get to the conversation. It's up here, and I think it's interesting. Some of the findings. This shows in here some of the links to other forms of disease: prostate cancer, colon cancer, breast cancer, as I mentioned before, and then elevated risk of all sorts of other things. And then finally, on this side here, one of the nice things is that you really see this powerful combination between exercise and nutrition. And I think this is really why at least my own personal interest and why I'm so excited about these conversations is because we're in a great position to actually have this impact. Even though we are not, dietitians, and I don't think any of us purport to be, we're often connecting with people at such a sort of a very deep level because we're seeing them often, that we really could make inroads into their decision-making patterns. We can really kind of help change their beliefs and how it impacts them. And so whereas most of us, I think, are very comfortable talking about exercise as a component of healing and ultimately coming back from an injury or living the best version of themselves, I've at least found not very many people, at least in our profession, are nearly as comfortable talking about the food component. But you can see in here, here's a nice randomized primary prevention intervention looking at men and women with reduced glucose tolerance and just 58% reduction in the risk of developing diabetes. That's substantial, and that's something that we can essentially promise to our patients if we know what we're doing. On other studies, you see a 40% reduction in each. This was the Chinese forearm study, and then some of the other ones down here looking at significant changes after a 12-month period. So in knowing that, I started to look at in our practice, how could we do this? And although most people who I've met and talked to know that we typically follow a plant-based approach, this is not to say it's the only way. But one of the interesting things that I found here was that in 2013, Kaiser Permanente came out and basically said the same thing. They came out and talked to their physicians, which of course we know there's plenty of them, and said, look, we really want to recommend this. And so this article, again, I don't know if I put the link up, but if not, I can certainly get it. You could Google it, just type in nutritional update, Kaiser Permanente plant-based diet, and you'll find it. And then a whole sort of info packet for folks. So we sort of took some of these concepts and really started to apply them. This year, actually in 2015, early in 2015, we took a 3-person group, a physical therapist who is also a certified diabetes educator, healthy eating, expert, and then a person who's actually gone through this and done some amazing things by changing his diet. They kind of came together and said, look, we want to start some sort of a group-based approach, which we're calling like a lifestyle group or metabolic health coaching or something like that. And so here are 3 quick cases, and then I'll sort of get off the stage and we'll talk about the sort of have some conversation. But ultimately, what they did is they started this this lifestyle-based group, and so this is the first kind of case, right? A woman in her late 30s, really outwardly you would never know that she has anything kind of going on, and so she's kind of active mom. Interestingly, after 10 weeks of some kind of dietary intervention, which is primarily plant-based, and so that's, you'll often see me on Twitter say, eat more plants. Just as kind of an editorial side there, I am not a vegan, and I'm not necessarily somebody who tells you that you would have to eat plant-based, but overall, when you look at the global burden of disease and you look at some of the studies that approach it, most of us don't get enough fiber in our diet. Most of us don't get enough phytonutrients that come from plants, and so generally the easiest recommendation is increase that. And so that's really where my head is at. But these folks went on something that was very close to a plant-based diet, and we saw in this particular woman a triglyceride drop of almost 50%. I mean, that is like unbelievable. She lost 12 pounds, primarily around her midsection, so a 3.5-inch reduction, and her glucose came down by 35 milligrams grams per deciliter into the low risk range. So that's a small kind of 10-week intervention that was done by 3 folks coming together and talking about food, one of which was a PT. The next person, a 40-year-old woman who really was pulled in by watching a family member. She didn't really think this was something that was important to her, but she saw the results that her brother was getting, and decided to take on a 10-week cycle, and so she did. She also saw a 3.5-inch reduction, 24-pound weight loss, and a 27% reduction in total cholesterol. In most people, that would rival a statin. 26% reduction in LDL cholesterol, and achieved what's considered an ideal blood pressure of less than 120 and less than 80. And then you've got this guy who I was just rocked by seeing his results. So here's the classic kind of standard American diet. This is a big guy. He's in his 40s. He actually did 2 10-week lifestyle groups. He did one, saw an amazing change, and decided he wanted to do another one. He was in an extreme level of hypertension and was carrying significant amount of excess body weight and on multiple medications to address it. So he lost almost 110 pounds. This guy, by changing his diet. I mean, that is essentially a 7th grader he lost my daughter. Extreme hypertension to completely off medication. I mean, this is a person who has come off meds entirely and working with his doctor, and reduced his waist circumference, his belly fat by almost, getting up near 8.5 inches. So really, really impressive results. And these are folks who are not necessarily doing it with any level of extreme exercise. They're really just changing their diet. Exercise, of course, is awesome and comes next, but just the kind of results that are mind-blowing. So as a PT, I'm looking at this and saying, wow, I mean, what kind of stress can I get off this guy's body by taking 100 pounds off his frame? And will that impact his body's ability to heal? And if so, then by default, we have a role in it. One final thing that I left up there, I thought, well, this is something that hopefully if I throw out there this month, maybe next month, someone else can bring something. So I asked for a recipe of the month. This is a Thai recipe that's sort of a soba noodle bowl, and something that anybody can do. And ultimately what we often do is we'll find a recipe and then tweak it and make it a little more, a little healthier. So that's something that I'll throw out there. Hopefully, anybody can try it. I know there's the hashtag PT Kitchen. I've seen that one around, and then I know a few of us have talked about that. So throw that out there. Try it, or tweet me back and let me know how it goes. All right. So hopefully that didn't take up too much of our time. We're hopefully at a point where we can start some discussion and get going from there. On Twitter, you can certainly hit me anytime at Mike Eisenhart and these other folks as we get going. I'm going to turn my screen share off, and we can have some conversation.
Hey, so Mike, a quick question I have for you. When you have these conversations with the patients, is there like a minimum hurdle that you kind of have to kind of get them to think about this more? Let's say they don't come to you actively, and they just kind of like, they show up in the clinic, and you look at them, and you think, hey, they might be a good candidate for getting involved in this nutritional aspect. Is there like a minimum hurdle you use to get them in?
So we don't really try to come up with any kind of a standard, like checklist where we might say, hey, let's bring, we're suggesting this to a person. More often than not, we just begin with the conversation, and we're really trying, just like we would for anything else, we want someone to see their complete picture of their health. And so ultimately where it comes down to is, we're just basically very open and honest with the person and say, look, like, there are many things that I feel like I can do to help you, but what we're really here doing is trying to help you live the very best version of you. And so, if you're ready at some point, we can certainly help you with some of the other risk factors that you may have. And then we kind of launch into the conversation. And usually, when a person's ready, they might make some offhanded comments like, oh, my back hurts because of this extra belly I'm carrying around. And
Right.
Many times, as a PT, it's natural for us to go like, no, that's not it. And it's a little uncomfortable to say, well, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think if we could get a little bit of the weight off your frame, it would probably speed up your recovery and might actually help some of your discomfort. So, if that's something you're open to, let's talk about it.
That's a good way to do it. I mean, you kind of like throw the open invite out there, and they're kind of thinking about it already. So.
Well, and so that's, I mean, I at least, in looking at this over the years, so much of it is about behavior change and understanding that people are going through those transitions, and although we could probably talk about that the whole time, I mean, I really do believe that the stages, the sort of trans-theoretical model, the stages of change, I think it holds. I mean, it seems to, really hold, at least in our experience. And so, when a person is throwing out that conversation point of, hey, I know my belly's an issue, or I know that extra weight I'm carrying, oftentimes they're trying that on, they're experimenting, with you as a trusted resource. And so we'll often say, well, hey, look, like, you can try something. And then we're also often quick to say, listen, it often takes multiple trials and errors, and you're going to figure this out if you want to. And when you're ready for a real, specific plan, you let me know, and I can get you in front of the right people. So I'm going to unmute some mics here, and we'll open it up to some conversation. All right. So let me see here. Good. All right. Is everybody back?
We're back.
We're back.
All right. So let's have some conversation. How does this play in? How do we, as a profession, start to work risk reduction, cardiometabolic specifically, into the conversation?
Mike, I think you made an awesome point about the vital signs. I think that's very much underused in orthopedics and in the manual therapy setting. And aside from a ton of evidence for them, for blood pressure, for heart rate, I think it is a gateway, a conversation starter, and it's everything you talked about. You know, it's the, oh, you know, I'm here for my back pain. Why are you measuring my blood pressure? And that opens up that door to these kinds of conversations about the overall, the big picture of not just fixing your back pain, but really looking at all this atmosphere that you're dealing with so many moving parts. And I think it really helps get that conversation going, aside from having critical data for yourself as a clinician.
Yeah, right on. I think blood pressure is an easy one, right? And we know that that there are some really good kind of tools out there that we can use. I mean, certainly we could talk about microvessel disease and how that plays in. One of the things that I posted on the links, and I guess I didn't put it in the slides, but it's on the links, is the European College of Cardiology or whatever they're called. They have what they call the SCORE, and it's a chart very similar to that heart age. And there was a recent study, like last couple of weeks, that came out and said, look, here's a 6-question questionnaire that anyone could really put on like an intake form even, and it runs very close line as far as correlation with blood work. So even in PT clinics where you may not have the ability to get blood work, which, as an aside, I believe every PT can have this ability. I really do. It's not that hard. We've been able to get it. But if you don't, and you think that's a barrier, then some of these even simple questionnaires, like the like the Healthy Start one that we did, can be there as well.
Do you share recipes with people? Because I feel like that's also a big barrier, even for me. I hear about, and we talked about a little bit about this before, about healthier eating or green eating, and I kind of start looking at stuff, and just by reading the name of the recipe, I want to throw up.
Nice.
Yeah.
So we do, as part of that metabolic group, they do quite a bit of that. In fact, they actually do cooking demos, and they actually will try the recipe right there, and many times, and then they're doing the whole thing. They're teaching people how to shop and giving them all the information they need. So it's theory and kind of personal experience, but it's also very practical. But yeah, I mean, we ultimately will point people based on again what their level of tolerance is. If a person says to me, hey, I'm like I hate fruits and vegetables, like I retch at the sight of them, I'm probably going to start you with a smoothie or something, like, okay, let's start you with something really small, like maybe what we call like a peanut butter cup smoothie, right? It's basically like the plant version of candy. It tastes good. It tastes like a shake. And once we get you on that, then we'll move you slowly and steadily towards something else.
Yeah, I think that whole lifestyle change and habit changing is really important, and you do have to show them how to shop. And if you don't give someone a plan and have them have a bunch of recipes to try and kind of slowly wean them into it, it's why so many diets fail, is because they try to go all in, and they're not even like 70-30 or 80-20 like you and I say we are in terms of plant-based versus meat. When someone's like, oh, I tried being vegetarian or vegan for a while and it didn't work out for me, and I'm like, well, that's just like saying I tried making Thai food. I tried, being a Thai kitchen for 2 months and it didn't work out, and you like didn't have any plan. You just tried making recipes, or you just tried cooking Thai food randomly.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a skill set, right? And I can't say that I'm somebody who is super skilled in the kitchen. I mean, thankfully, my wife is really very skilled in that regard. But yeah, I mean, it's like anything else. You got to sort of make some mistakes, and you're going to have some duds, right? Where you try and you're like, that was just terrible. The other thing also we find is that as people's palates change, then you can start introducing some of these other foods in. When a person is on a very kind of standard American diet or a very high sugar diet, their senses are so cranked up that if you gave them something that was plant-based diet, it's going to taste very bland. If you gave that to someone who has a very low sugar diet, they're going to say, wow, it's so flavorful. So you just have to kind of understand that and respect it. And sometimes you start with very bold flavors. So various foods can give you that, but oftentimes generous use of spices and things like that to still give the person the flavor they need.
Yeah, I explain that to patients by like the risk reward ratio, and foods high in fat and high in sugar. Once you get used to that, there is an accommodation that takes place, much in the same way that we accommodate to TENS or any kind of sensation or something that we experience over and over again. Our nervous system actually becomes kind of desensitized to it. So you need like greater and greater amounts of either sugar or fatty foods to kind of get the same feeling of satisfaction. That satisfaction is really there. The reason why we have so much satisfaction is because a long time ago when we didn't have experience as much sweet or fatty things, like they were higher in calories typically, and that made us be able to survive longer. But now we just have so much access to that. We're kind of our nervous systems are kind of desensitized, and we need more and more of it. So that's my explanation for physiologically why like you said, a plant-based diet would taste really bland. But for those of us who are kind of used to it and you kind of work your way into it, the less sweet things you have. Like now, it's hard for me to have something extremely sweet.
Yeah, you definitely do find there's a sort of a backlash to that, right? And I mean, again, your sensitivity is going to change. I mean, there's all sorts of different kind of timelines out there, but I mean, although I hate the whole concept of like a detox, I mean, in a sense, that's what happens. I mean, you're literally changing your sensory experience based on what you're putting in every day, and so you're going to have a different reaction to it.
How do you guys deal with the question of, let's say somebody comes in and let's say it's the dad of the family, right, or the mom, whatever, but in this case a dad, and you present this to them, he's like, man, that really makes sense, I'm going to try it, and they come back 2 weeks later, they go, well, how'd it go? And they're like, well, I tried it for the first day, but it's just a pain in the ass cooking separately for me when my wife doesn't want to do this, my kids have to eat this or that. How do you account for that? Like, how do you transition and help them transition the family to something like this?
So social support, of course, is like, that's the slam dunk if you can get it. If you can get a whole family involved, or even the majority of the family involved, it's going to make the success rate much, much higher. On the flip side, if a person is really committed and they've kind of gotten that far, that's often what we'll kind of have that conversation. I mean, if you're, in a sense, it's like, well, where do you see yourself? Do you see this as something that's an impossible barrier, or do you see it as a very hard barrier? If it's impossible, then we have to start over, right? We have to find you something that is possible. If it is possible, then it's okay. Well, is it worth it to you? Or is making the sacrifice and kind of having that pain in your ass, is it worth it? If a person says no, I mean, look, that's okay. Like, it's all right. It may not be worth it to you right now. The trick for us is to try to figure out that formula, and know how is it worth it. And again, it might be okay, at what level is it worth it, right? Get into the question of dosage. Like, could you eat an apple today? Is that something you can do? Is that relatively low barrier? Yeah, I could do that. That's no problem. Okay, great. Let's start there. Ultimately, we know we have to get to a minimum dosage to have the effect. Like, and generally, the research says 5 servings. So, okay, like, that's our goal. Our goal is to build you up to 5 servings. What's easy?
Well, as a home health therapist, predominantly, it gives us an advantage because we're actually inside people's homes and we can see actually what they're consuming and what they have in their cabinets and cupboards and stuff like that. Also, you have a greater possibility of getting the family involved and making sure the patient eats right and make sure they do their exercises on a daily basis, get some walking in and stuff like that. For our agency, we have implemented a heart failure program. So clients with certain diagnoses like diabetes and heart failure, we definitely try to educate them on better eating habits and lifestyle changes. And so far it has been effective. There's some people who've had a history of comorbidities and rehospitalization. You win some, you lose some. So I think taking the vital signs is important too for all diabetic clients. We make sure we ask them their glucose readings because that does affect their mood and their participation in exercises as well, I've realized. So that's just my 2 cents for the evening.
glucose readings is great, and of course, I mean, it's so easy now for people to get them. Again, that may be one of those close to a vital sign for us in this world. So while we're talking, I'm gonna put up Cinema's risk didn't translate in the last slides, so hopefully everything started with. And I don't know if can you see that? Oh,
Not yet.
Man.
Yeah, I just took the little the health survey that Mike tweeted out and put into his blog post. It's kind of interesting actually to go through the process of filling out the survey. It's pretty quick, 10 minutes, maybe 15. But definitely kind of makes you think about maybe questions or things that you might want to implement into a program at your place when you're talking with a patient or putting together something for a patient.
Did that pop up?
Yep, I see it now.
Okay. Yeah. So I don't know if everyone got a chance to see this, but so I really like this particular tool. This is a recent tool that Harvard or somehow sponsored, or they paid for the research or something. In most of the kind of wellness world, there's this health risk assessment or health risk appraisal, and they're usually some version of a survey. But this one is pretty good, I thought, and it really covers most of the key areas. And again, it's self-report, so it's not a perfect tool. But I like the fact that it gives you a couple of things. It gives you kind of this score and gives you sort of the little thermometer diagram there. But I also like that it gave you some specific recommendations. It gives you the ability to say, hey, you should look at this or you should look at that. And one of the things that I had put up in the graphic, on the Google Hangout was mine. But so I don't know, Cinema, what did you think about that? Did you feel like that was like a helpful thing that you could use?
Oh, definitely. I think it's helpful on kind of two fronts. One, for the person who just filled out the survey, and if that person is a PT, again, like they have things that they could work into their program when they're working with patients. So I think the survey itself was really nice. It's a good graphic and it's a good series of questions. It's pretty quick, so quick and useful.
Hey, gotta run, guys. Finish a podcast and post it. Mike, thanks for the invite, man. Looking forward to it again next month.
All right, no sweat.
All right, later, Gene.
So, yeah, so I don't know if anyone else got a chance to try that or give it a shot, but anyone have any thoughts on that tool?
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to try it. I feel like when I clicked on it that the link wasn't right. But I think that if it is that quick, they have something similar at our children's museum. It's like an interactive kiosk, and I've done that there before too. And I think that even though it's self-reporting, I mean, I think most people are going to be honest when it comes to their health. So something simple like that I think is very useful.
So we got a question from the world of Twitter, and it looks like, Andrew, you jumped on already, but let's go ahead and capture it. So the question was, can anyone speak to the legal aspect of nutrition counseling as a PT? Is it in or out of our scope? So Andrew, since you responded already, I'm going to give you first crack at it.
Oh, sure, thanks. I mean, I just said I know that I think there's different rules, obviously, state to state about what we can and cannot talk about or how we can present it. But I think the big thing is that, from a federal standpoint, Medicare opened the door for this conversation because of the new rules with us providing vitamin D counseling and discussing obesity with Medicare patients. So if we're having to discuss these things, then that opens the door for us to discuss a variety of nutritional issues. So I think the big question though is, what sort of the phrase I like is that a little bit of knowledge can be a dangerous thing. In that, do we overstep our bounds sometimes in talking about a lot of times specifics when we may not have had the proper educational background? I mean, obviously we can get that through some continuing education resources, but most of us don't have that. So are we stepping on other practitioners' toes a little bit too much, and is that going to come back to bite us? So I think the big thing is being able to have some conversations, giving some good basic information, but also either helping them get in front of the right person for more detailed information, or setting up some sort of collaborative arrangement with nutritionist or dietitian or those kinds of things.
Yeah, so I essentially agree with that. I mean, you need to have some kind of an integrated team, and we are not, we're not a standalone practitioner in this sense. When if a person came to us and said, "Hey, I have this diagnosis, and I want you to give me nutritional advice to deal with this diagnosis," I would feel like that's out of our scope. We don't give specific dietary advice based on a disease state, a medicine at some level or a dietitian. But if we think that it is a factor in the thing that we're seeing them for, then I think we actually are also doing them at minimum a disservice and potentially harm if we're not at least addressing it as a potential component. And that's something that we should be working alongside their doc closely with. If they're not open to it, if a person says, "Look, I really don't care about that. I'd rather be on 15 medications and just get me out of pain," that's okay. We can certainly mark that down in our documentation and say exactly that. Like, look, we sort of broached the subject and had the conversation, or at least attempted to, and the person is not at a state of readiness where they're ready to address this. Done. That's the end of the conversation. But if on the flip side a person says, "Hey, actually, tell me a little bit more. I am interested," then I think that we're definitely within our scope to have that exact conversation. Again, we tend to limit it at a disease state. We've never and are not interested in giving dietary advice based on a disease. Overall, what we're looking at is if I can lower your risk of a disease, prevent it entirely, or at least lower your risk of kind of having an exacerbation of it, then I'm doing you a service. And if I can kind of guide you with good quality information, essentially, here's what the science says, here's the study, here's this study, then I think what we're really doing is just trying to help educate and be comprehensive.
Yeah, I think we can be good curators of information in that, obviously, Mike, you've done a lot of reading on this and research on this, so you can give a lot of detail, but also just really lead them in the right direction and give them the right questions to ask and give them some really good places to kind of start from. I think that's the big challenge. I mean, kind of like with anything, if we I had a patient the other day whose both ankles were swollen up, and that was a situation where I was like, well, this does not seem correct, and I don't know exactly what it is. Well, I think you need to get in front of your doctor, because I was thinking back in my mind a congestive heart issue, which is what it turned out to be. But it's one of those things, if I ignored it, even though because I was not seeing the patient for that situation, then that's a major problem as well. So I think you bring up a good point with not addressing certain health and lifestyle factors can also be doing the patient a disservice.
All right.
Yeah, I think the question of legality too. People are asking if we're overstepping our bounds, and I think that those of us who are cash-based probably offer something like that through a wellness program as opposed to calling it physical therapy. I mean, certainly if it does directly address whatever we're seeing before, like why does someone have this chronic pain? Why do they have aches and pains all over their body? Why have they been diagnosed with fibromyalgia? I think we can kind of directly address that, but otherwise those of us who are in cash-based practices who offer wellness and just kind of general fitness classes, I think as long as we don't call it physical therapy, we're not doing anything more than a trainer would do, as long as we're not relating it back to a disease process.
Right on. All right. So and thanks, Eric, for the question. So if anyone else has questions, we're still kind of getting a feel for how this whole thing works. But if you post the questions, they do pop up in the queue, so we can certainly address those as we go. So we've got a little more time here. We're running up near the end, but a few more minutes. Anyone else have any thoughts? Give me any of your sort of final thoughts before we start to wind it down.
I think when you talk about these diseases, like number one being cardiovascular and number two being cancer, those are what in the plant-based world they call the diseases of affluence, and they're preventable by and large. And I think as PTs, we are obviously against things like anti-inflammatories and narcotics to use for pain, but we seem to let all the statins just kind of pass, and doctors make these vague recommendations like you should be more active, but they'd rather just throw 10 medications at someone and have them not change their habits at all. So I think that the frequency which we usually see patients is much more than the twice twice a year thing, which is not really enough, obviously, to change anyone's habits. And I think we're in a better position to make suggestions of overall health.
It's a great point.
Mike, I think speaking to that was one of the slides that you had in your presentation was the one showing where the levels went down with increased medication use, but the waist circumference and other factors went up, which I think kind of highlights that patient dependence on medication versus, physical activity. Yeah, yeah, that one right there. So really, even though some of the numbers went down, but they're relying on more of a passive approach, if you will, versus a much more active approach. And I think that speaks to a lot of the people we see in general, also just probably society in general now, looking more for that quick fix, something easy, taking a pill, not having to put in as much of the effort, which makes it much more challenging. Then it's really having, really gets on them, kind of like you talked about, sort of putting the pressure on them or the onus on them to open the door to really being ready to make a change, and us being able to pick up on that and then capitalize on it.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm, if there's something that I can say, with full energy, that I'm hoping, right? I'm hoping that as a society that we are getting to the point where we're just not okay with it, right? Like, we're not okay being on, 10 or I saw something, and I can find, I'm sure, where, 60% of the adult population is on at least one medication, and 50 or 40% is on multiple meds, right? So when we start thinking in terms of, polypharmacy and all of the side effects of that, I'm hoping that as a society we'll get to the point where we're just not okay with it, and whether that's medicine taking the lead, or PT taking the lead, or dietetics, or nutrition, or whoever taking the lead, to be the one standing there to say, hey, as a professional, my job is to help you say it's okay to not want to be on 15 different medications and walk around like a zombie. And I can work with you and your doc, and we can get you on an exercise prescription, and we can get you on a nutrition plan, and we can get you moving in the right direction to get off those meds and to live a much better version of you. And we've certainly seen it, and we have some docs that we work with who are very much in line and on board with that, and they are kind of happening more and more frequently. If you just Google the term lifestyle medicine, the programs are popping up left and right. I know in New Jersey there's some talk of it happening at Rutgers, and we've got some physicians that have reached out and really looking to partner with us because that's what the market is demanding. And so I don't know if anyone else sees that, but that's if there's a hope, it's definitely that.
No, that's true. Actually, I see it around where I'm working. I know a rheumatologist who said almost verbatim what you said. Like, he can't stand taking meds, and he would rather not have his patients take a lot of medications, and so he kind of works with a nutritionist, PT, acupuncturist, whatever, to kind of shift his patients away from medication dependency. So that's definitely something that I see around here too.
Yeah, and I actually work with a nutritionist who's a very good friend of mine. So whenever I have a patient that, I don't, the cardiometabolic risk cluster, these are certainly not anyone in my patient population. But if I do have a patient who, I usually get patients who just want to have more ideas, more food options, recipes, have someone write out their food plan for them. I work with a nutritionist for those reasons, but I rarely have patients who are on medications or who have this cardiometabolic risk cluster. But I do work with a nutritionist who's very, very helpful. And like Monique said, I go into patients' homes also. So you do get a good idea of what they're eating, what their lifestyle is, and quite honestly, a lot of the patients that I see have chefs, so they're not even really doing the cooking. So I actually learn a lot from them and from their chefs on different recipes, and we talk recipes all the time, which I find helpful for me, and then they find helpful for them. So the talk of food and diet is always pops up in many, many sessions with my patients, not because they're having major problems, but just because they, if I have found a recipe that I really love, I always sort of pass it along. So it's pretty open dialogue on food.
It's awesome. So first of all, I'm a huge fan of the idea of having a chef. I would like to try that on for a while.
Yeah.
Just kind of see how that goes. But but overall, that is.
Yeah, a lot
awesome.
of my patients have housekeepers and chefs who do their cooking. So I actually learn a lot from their chefs on some really great healthy options and some not so healthy ones. But for the most part, they're pretty healthy.
Sure. All right, group. Any other final thoughts? Because we're going to wind it down.
No, next time I want to talk about how the microbiome influences obesity and why a calorie isn't necessarily a calorie.
That's a huge topic. In fact, we touched on that a little bit, right? I think in the first one.
Yeah, the initial.
Yeah,
I didn't even know there was a first one. I would have been there.
That was us just kind of getting our legs under us and learning how to get this going. But yeah, our hope is that we're going to do this once a month, and in general, kind of keep it around, an hour long if we can pull it off, and that's awesome. So definitely tweet back to myself or Cinema especially, but anybody on to get us a topic that we might be interested in covering, and without a doubt, if we have sort of an expert in the group or we can get an expert. My hope is that that's how the format will kind of go. We can do a little bit of an educational component, and keep it relatively straightforward for people who may not see this stuff, but then have some conversation afterward. The limitation of Google Hangouts is that I think you can have up to 10 guests at once, and then anyone else can view the live recorded video. But yeah, microbiome would be fun to get into. And in fact, I think Karen, it was you that sent me a researcher from maybe the UK or somebody who checked this guy out on Twitter, and he gave a great TED talk, and it was pretty awesome.
Yeah, he's one of the biggest researchers in the world on the microbiome. So if you really want to learn microbiome stuff, follow John Crane, JohnCrayn. I interviewed him on my podcast after I saw, let me see, I'm trying to find, Cryan, John Crane. He's from Ireland, and he is one of the biggest researchers in the world in the microbiome. And it's interesting. The research is getting there. They don't have any definitive, at least when I spoke to him a couple of months ago, they are learning more and more about how the microbiome affects the brain, and vice versa. They have some pathways mapped out. They still don't have the exact bacteria that do X, Y, and Z, which is why when I asked him about probiotics, you can listen to his answer, but his answer was, I'll take a probiotic when they have definitive research on what a probiotic does. So that was his answer, which I thought was really interesting. So he's a great person. If you could watch some of his lectures, they're a little heavy, but they're very, very good.
Awesome. So do you know what episode it was when you interviewed him, or about how long ago, if we can tell people?
I can look.
Yeah, it's not critical. We just catch you on iTunes, right? And it's in there.
Yeah. It's definitely in there. I don't know exactly when, but it's in there somewhere. I would say it was probably earlier this year, maybe. That would be my guess.
And his name is John.
John Crane.
Cryan.
Cryan, And he's got a great TED Talk, like you mentioned his TED Talk. He's got a really great TED Talk. He's a cool guy.
Awesome.
Very cool guy, super duper smart, and very sort of matter of fact.
That's awesome. All right, Monique, anything from you before we wrap it up?
Again, I'm glad this is actually happening. I do believe it's more favored for cash paying consumers because it's a lot to incorporate in a busy outpatient clinic. And again, a lot of these guys don't have access to blood work information or take the time to do vital signs to know, but it is very important because we're treating the whole patient. So if we can make this catch on in the PT community, I'll be very happy if it does.
Awesome. Thanks. Andrew, anything on the wrap up?
No, it's really good. Yeah, I'm definitely glad that we're talking about this. I also just found the episode is number 138.
Yeah, it's 138. I was going to say that. Yeah.
Awesome.
We know who listens to your podcast.
It's from January of this year.
Yeah, at least I knew it was earlier this year.
All right, Cinema, giving you the last word, man.
All right, so a couple of things actually. Urson mentioned why calorie isn't a calorie, and there's actually a really good book that kind of goes into it a little bit. It's called Why We Get Fat by Gary Taubes. He's a journalist, but he does really good research, and I think it's a really good book if you want to check that out. And then Karen mentioned the microbiome, and I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but there's actually a company called uBiome. It's kind of like the 23andMe of our microbiome. So you can actually send samples. I'm not sure what samples, so don't ask me because I haven't tried it yet. But you can send samples, and they kind of go through it and give you a rough makeup of your microbiome. It's probably something I'll toy with in the near future, but just wanted to let you guys know it's out there and it's becoming more used by the public.
Interesting. I'll have to check that out. I just checked out a company called Mother Earth, and it was by some doctor who's looking at skin flora, and he developed some sort of spray that helps restore your skin flora for those of us who like wash your hands 1,000 times a day working on patients. 'Cause I always noticed the more I washed my hands, and particularly after Thanksgiving when I washed plates and like under hot water forever, now my eczema is totally broken out, and I'm a germ freak. So, you know, this guy pretty much convinced me to like try washing my hands with soap only twice a week, and otherwise just try this spray and just rinse with water and like brush your hands with horsehair or something. So, because I'm just killing all the flora on my skin. So I'm about to try that product too, because I think that PTs tend to wash their hands a lot after working with patients, and if you guys are like me, I'm sure you noticed that putting lotion on or whatever Magic Bees doesn't quite cut it.
Nice. So yeah, so the uBiome, that's ubiome.com if you want to check that out. I have not done that, but I know they do sequencing kits, which is pretty neat. And here's a picture of the book, Why We Get Fat, Gary Taubes, and he's got lots of real interesting stuff, and is very big on the sugar side of the world and kind of added sugar. And then as far as a show notes, if there is such a thing for a Google cast here, I put them at the bottom. Anything that we can do here, certainly use those. And if you have questions or anything you want to get back, hit us on Twitter. Mention anyone who's on the call tonight, and we'll definitely try to get back with you. Other than that, I think we are going to wrap it up there. Thank you, everybody, for taking part and being involved. And for anyone who watches this or has questions, we appreciate you doing it. And hopefully the PT profession can continue to move forward to nutrition as a part of our practice.
Amen.
Everybody, have a great week. And,
you too. Thank
talk
you.
to you in a month.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mike.